As Mike said, I'll introduce Reinier de Graaf, who's a partner at OMA, the Office of Metropolitan Architecture, but also director of AMO, which is OMA's research-based think tank. And he'll now present Volume 3, which is the graphic narrative, the envisioning of the project. Thanks, Reinier.
One may wonder what the hell an architect does at a venue that's about emission reductions and a potential energy grid. Because so far, I have to say, the performance of our profession in the field of sustainability hasn't been that impressive. It's generally limited to a number of token green walls at Biennale exhibitions or some kind of showcase vanity occasions. This wasn't always the case. 40 years ago, at the end of the 1960s, there was an American architect, post-war modern architect called Buckminster Fuller, who actually did projects on linking the idea of sustainability to energy provision, and he addressed them at the appropriate scale, namely the scale of the planet. But since that time, it is like we have seen a strange and incongruous trend where the scale of action has basically become, at least in our profession, inversely proportional to the awareness of the issue, which is painful. What is even more painful is that that trend somehow doesn't seem to be limited to our profession. Virtually every field of today's market economy shows the same picture. Green is good, but it is as though somehow, somewhere, an invisible hand keeps the scale of ambition firmly in check. I think that has been nowhere more clear than actually at Copenhagen, where there was an unprecedented number of people, a kind of an unprecedented exposure, and nevertheless, very little to show for. The unfortunate consequence is, of course, that those who tried hardest end up being damned most, which is sorry. But anyway, meanwhile, the world continues to emit. Or maybe I should just say pollute. It's a more straightforward, accessible term, because that's what it really is. These are the three main emitters and their emissions currently. But of course, as the world continues to develop, and as the economy of particularly China continues to grow, if everyone would behave like the arch polluters, namely the Americans, this is what the kind of future emission would look like. Clearly a very daunting prospect. And clearly, a very daunting prospect for the Earth, because as CO2 emissions keep on growing, so does the temperature of the Earth, with potentially disastrous consequences. I know there is those who are skeptical about this, and particularly after the failure of Copenhagen. Scientists were criticized for inaccuracies in the report to such an extent that, for instance, the latest Rasmussen reports poll indicate that 59% of people find it somewhat likely, 35% find it very likely, that actually climatologists actually fudge their reports. The irony is, however, that those who criticize others for inaccuracies have not a plausible number themselves, so there you have it. But maybe the numbers are not the point. Maybe it is precisely the uncertainty of the numbers that's the point. And maybe it's precisely the uncertainty of the numbers that should compel us to action. These are climate incidents, but I mean the incidents are so frequent that one can really wonder if they are incidents. In a way, climate change is here, and certainly the cost associated with climate change is here, is spiraling out of control. And I think the only uncertainty in terms of numbers is that nobody knows precisely where this will end up if no action is taken. But beyond climate, there are other benefits, and there are other things that are worth looking at in the context of this particular project. A Europe that will rely on fossil fuel automatically means that that will be a Europe which relies on the part of the world outside Europe. And one can wonder whether that's a smart or even sustainable idea. A Europe that doesn't transform, this is the trade balance vis-a-vis China, will be the first place that finds its products, which it trades with the other part of the world, kind of outmoded. And when it doesn't modernize, when it doesn't innovate, it will have nothing to offer instead. And this kind of trade balance will be a trade unbalance. I think the current moment, in terms of the climate debate, in terms of renewable energy, contains a very, very weird irony. This is John F. Kennedy, 1961, addressing the joint session of Congress, announcing a man on the moon before the turn of the decade. When he did that, it's now proven that he didn't have a clue how to do that, that the technology to do that was not in place. This was a mere question of creating a political climate in which the likelihood of such a thing happening would be so great that he could announce it with confidence. Somehow, in this debate, we seem to have the opposite. Much of our research shows that the technology is in place, that the way it can be done, but that somehow there is another thing on another level that keeps it from happening. That the arguments amount to, in a way, to such a degree of common sense that one wonders sometimes why it hasn't already happened. This is Gorbachev last year, tear down this wall and save the planet. Kind of acknowledging and encouraging people to go beyond national interest, go beyond vested economic interest, come together and simply address a problem that transcends the size of a nation at the scale that transcends the size of the nation. Unfortunately, the European Union, more or less at about the same time, actually embraced the idea of a Europe-wide approach to reduce emissions by 80% in 2050. What is clear is that all sectors have to contribute, but that without the transport, and mainly the power sector, such a thing will not happen. Who could be opposed? But it's not just wind turbines though, because they're a frequently used image. But the nice thing about renewable energy is that in a way, renewable energy is a very diverse sort of energy. I mean, I think there is about 7 sorts in our study alone, and that one could say that Europe's diversity is actually mirrored in the diversity of renewable energy. More about that later. But so far, of course, Europe is Europe, which means that Europe is a collection of individual states who happily sort of, mistrust others and proceed to pursue everything all at once. Europe. A preferential Europe when it comes to this particular debate. A kind of coordinated approach. This is Dr. Strangelove going green. But without joking, I mean, there is this clear element to renewable energy which could be interesting. It's geographically bound. When it happens in one place, it doesn't happen in the other place. But the nice thing is that when it happens in a way, in the winter or in the summer, the windy north could profit from the sunny south. And in the winter, the sunny south could profit from the windy north. I mean, a kind of an idea of complementarity that isn't just strictly limited to wind, because this is the point I was wanted to get at, is that in a way, beyond a diversity in countries, beyond a geographical diversity, Europe also has an enormous climatic diversity, which makes it the kind of perfect territory to capitalize altogether on all these renewable energy sources in a kind of situation of mutual benefit. Almost like a kind of band of brothers who join together, each contributing a different skill, in this case each contributing a different form of renewable energy, all towards the greater good of the whole. This is a kind of Europe. We labeled it En Europa, where we simply, just for speculation's sakes, imagine a future Europe in which regions actually do not derive their identity from their culture, but from their main source of renewable energy. So in here is Solaria in the south, Biomassburg in the location of the former Habsburg Empire, and Geothermalia, a kind of greater Germany. All, of course, in a pleasant state of interconnectedness, each one benefiting from the effort of the next.